Okay, good day everyone. This is the first tutorial video and what I hope will be a series of tutorial videos that I'm going to do up for this subject to supplement the work that's covered in the Pracs. Now, first of all, I just want to say that I really don't want this to replace you guys actually showing up to the Pracs. I can cover as much as I can possibly cover in these things, but it won't give you the same depth and understanding that you'll get by being able to sit down and do it yourself, and also to go through it with the actual Prac runner as well. So what I'm going to do is well, we actually have to monitor the number of people that are showing up in our Pracs. If those numbers go below, or should I say, if those numbers maintain to be, say, greater than, I want to have at least 50% of you guys showing up, ideally 75%, then I'll keep making these videos. If by producing these videos the numbers go down to 0, I will stop making these videos. So it's completely the ball is completely and entirely in your court, so to speak. Okay, so let's get into it. I've started with the second Prac. I went through the first Prac a few times and came to the conclusion that I didn't really think we needed to do up a video for it. It's very self-guided, it's very easy to follow. However, if enough people send me messages, comment on Facebook, whatever the situation may be, or comment on this video on YouTube, I will do up a video for the first Prac. So you just let me know exactly where you're sitting. Okay, now I'm going to go through a little bit of a rant that I go through with all my students in my Pracs about something that I find to be incredibly important about these Pracs. So these Pracs are important, firstly, obviously because they actually teach you how to implement the statistical procedures that you learn in class in Minitab. So that's an incredibly important feature of these Pracs. Secondly, the hidden gem of information that's associated with these Pracs is that you can look at the situations that they've gotten, like what type of variables or what type of interpretation are they looking to gain from this, and as a result you can say, okay, well, they had this data and they did this in order to gain whatever interpretation they're looking for. When I'm doing my project, okay, I've got similar data, or I've got the same situation in terms of the data types and the type of analysis I'm looking to do. Okay, I can follow what they've done in the Prac. There will be nothing presented in the Pracs in terms of methods applied to data set that are incorrect. I.e., say for instance, here we're looking at generating a bar chart. That will never be applied to situations in which you should not use a bar chart. So it'll always, if you look at this and you see that the data that you've got is of a certain type and the test that's been produced, it's not the only test, but that is definitely a valid test or a valid procedure that you can use on the data that you've got to gain whatever analysis you're looking to gain. Okay, so the things that I'm going to cover today is summarized in this text file. I'll make this available for all people that are actually watching this video on YouTube, and also make it available on the Facebook pages, or you can email me and I'm happy to send it through to you. So we're going to look at single categorical data and the two different ways in which the two main types of analysis that you can perform. We're going to look at some multiple categorical data, so when we're measuring or interpreting the relationship between two categorical variables, hence categorical versus categorical. And then we're going to look at our numerical data, and it's going to be the same as before. So this is, meant to be single numerical. So when we're looking at a single numerical value on its own, different ways in which we can gain different types of analysis, and then also when we have multi-numerical, in this case numerical versus numerical. So there are other ways in which we can analyze multiple numerical when it's not of the situation, numerical versus numerical, and this will become evident as we go along in the semester. Now you'll see here that for any variable there are two main types of analysis that can be performed. There probably is more than that, but in terms of what we're going to be dealing with this unit, there is a visual analysis. So that's when we generate visual interpretations of the data, like graphs as an example, pie chart, bar chart, etc., that we can then use to gain an understanding of the data. And the second is what I'm referring to, and this is probably a very loose and poor definition, which is a number analysis. So that's when we're generating certain figures, like you think of like the mean, median, and mode and all that. These are all numbers, so the number analysis. Both of these complement each other, and both of them need to be used in order to gain a thorough understanding, or the best possible understanding of the data that you're dealing with. So let's just start off by looking at single categorical data. So I'm going to have a look at the data that they're working with here, which is bike. For anyone who's unsure about where to get this, data, you just go to Learning Resources, scroll down, folder called Practicals, and you'll see here's a listing of all of the Prac exercises as well as the data. Now this will become larger as more and more data sets are populated, and they'll be populated when they're required for the Prac. So there may be some for Prac4 that we haven't looked at yet, but they'll be uploaded before the Prac. So let's just open up the bike data. I'm running Minitab version 17 here, click OK, and we see here that we've got 5 variables. Now I'm just going to go through this very quickly. This is a categorical, this is a categorical, this is a continuous, categorical, categorical. If you're unsure about how to identify the variables, please look over the notes, and if you have any issues whatsoever, or if you disagree with any of the decisions that I've made, please come and see me, please, well, you can come and see me in my Pracs, or you can post a comment on this YouTube video or on the Facebook page, and I'll get back to you and I'll be able to explain in more detail. Okay, so let's just say we want to analyze the different types. So in this situation here, if you read the prelude to this, it was a data set that was collected for a project group for this subject, I don't know how many years ago. And in this case, they wanted to analyze how people are traveling in and out of a certain aspect of the city. So we can see here the time refers to the time intervals that it was measured. So this, I'm just making up figures here, but it could refer to like time interval 1 could be from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock at night, time interval 2 is 6 o'clock to 7, time interval 3 is 7 to 8, something like that. Type obviously refers to the mode of transport being used, so we've got bike, jogging, walking, and I think there's one referred to as other as well, which would be all other measures. The speed is obviously the speed that the person is traveling at. I'm assuming this is in kilometers per hour. The units are essentially meaningless really for the analysis that we're doing, but something that we need to keep in mind, obviously if it was your project. The direction obviously refers to the direction of travel, so in and out. I'm guessing it refers to in and out of the city. Again, it doesn't really matter for what we're doing. And gender, male or female, refers to gender. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with the bike, and let's look at some of the ways in which we can generate a visual analysis. So let's have a look at the pie chart, and let's have a look at the bar chart. These are both very, very simple to do. So all we need to do to generate a bar graph, a pie chart, is go to graph, pie chart. If you click in this box here, the variables will come up. I've had a lot of people on Prac2 going, what's going on? You need to click in here first. So we're going to click type, and I just want to make sure I've gotten rid of all of this stuff from before. Yep, okay. And obviously very, very simple pie chart. Now if you wanted to save this pie chart, you can just go right click, what is it again, actually I'm not sure. Anyway, forget that. You can either screenshot this. There are ways in which of being able to export the image in and out. One nice way, especially if when you're writing up your project, you're working with Microsoft Word as being the software utility that you're going to use to create the actual project report. You can just right click and go to send graph to Microsoft Word. I know that doesn't sound like much, but trust me, it will make life easier for you when you're actually writing up the report. And you know, I've seen people before, and understandably, you know, they're screenshotting everything and then importing the images. If you click send graph to Microsoft Word, it looks on the Windows operating system that you're working with. Actually, and I'm not sure if it would work using Mac if you're running it through a virtual machine, or Wine, for instance. But definitely within Windows, it then looks for any active Microsoft Words that are open, and it looks to the one that was last modified, or the one that's open at this point in time. So you'll figure it out anyway. It's relatively simple. So yeah, very easy to interpret. What a pie chart does in terms of its interpretation is it allows us to compare the quantities as relative proportions to each other. So if you just leave the mouse and let it hover over a specific slice of the pie, you'll see it'll come up and it'll tell you not only what category it falls into, so walk in this case, so I know you could have seen that using the legend, but it'll also tell you the percentage. So we know that this is roughly that the walks made up roughly 21.6% of the total number of data. So this is the beauty of a pie chart. It allows you to compare percentages against one another. But we don't actually know how many people were actually walking. We don't know how many people were on a bike. We don't know how many people were jogging, for instance. We just know how they compare to each other overall. So let's just say we want to be able to compare the actual values. Well, in that case, we would use something like a bar chart. So I'm just going to be doing a simple bar chart here. And again, here we're working with type. Click OK. I'm just going, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let's just put these one on top of each other. Okay, so the bar chart, in opposition to the pie chart, does allow you to compare those actual frequencies. So whilst we know from this graph that the bike made up roughly 66.1%, it doesn't tell us exactly how many there are. The bar chart tells us this, and there's roughly, say, I'm just guessing here, roughly 620, and same for jog and all that. So the bar chart's great. It allows us to compare frequencies against each other. So if we want to know exactly how many were in each, and the pie chart allows us to compare percentages. So what is an advantage in one is something that the other one doesn't cover. So this covers percentages, doesn't cover frequencies. This covers frequencies, doesn't cover percentages. So they're just two different types of being able to analyze the same variable, in this case being type, but in two different ways of being able to get they're not two separate interpretations, but they're two different ways of looking at it, so that when you combine that, you can get a far greater interpretation of how the data is actually behaving. So we've looked at pie charts and bar charts for looking at single situations. The next thing we're going to do is apply our first lot of number analysis, so to speak. So, okay, it's all good and well to have these graphs and everything like that. Graphs are fantastic for a visual interpretation, obviously, and often you can gain. Some people gain a hell of a lot more information from looking at visual analysis than they do to the number analysis, and then there are people that are in the opposite camps. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kill these. And again, you could save it here if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave it as it is. And we're going to do our first lot of numerical analysis. And in this case, we want to do, as it's typed up here, it's called tally individual variables. And you just have to bear with me for a second. I can't remember exactly where it's at. Or if it's in stat, tables. Here we go, yeah. So if we want to do a tally of an individual variable, and don't worry if you don't know what that means, it'll become very evident in a second. Just go to tables, tally individual variables. Here we're only just looking at the single variable type on its own. And what we're going to do is we're going to have it to display the counts and the percents. So if we click OK here, what we have here is the numbers that built the graphs that we looked at before. So the first column here, which refers to the counts, refers to the number that exists in each of the different categories. So 625 for bike, 110 for jog, and so on and so on. And then we also get the relative amounts. So what we've essentially got here, well, it's a full number summary of the pie chart and the bar chart. The counts, this is our bar chart, and what we've got here in terms of the percentages, this is our pie chart. Now, again too, on their own, they can tell you a lot of information, but it might not be able to allude about getting the greater understanding as what the visual analysis is. Similarly with the visual analysis, it on its own is not enough information in order to make a serious judgment about the data. So just like with everything, it's always best to apply as many different methods as possible to interpret the data, so that you can gain the best possible interpretation of this. And I know this might sound like real overkill, like I'm going into so much detail for such basic analysis, but you have to think, if you were applying this to a situation that was literally going to make or break a company that was worth millions of dollars, you would want to gain the best possible understanding of the data before you made any decisions that could put you into a very serious situation. Okay, so now let's have a look at the situation where we want to have multiple categorical data and we want to compare them against each other. So let's just say I wanted to compare type with gender. So I wanted to see is there a relationship between the two, and how can I actually gain an understanding of it. And the beautiful thing is, you'll see, is we can use both pie charts and bar charts in order to do a categorical versus categorical. Now I should add here that there is, for all of these, there actually is a lot more to come. So again, I meant to say a lot more to come, but you will see in the upcoming weeks that there's heaps that we can actually do here, and there is actually a lot more for all of them, but definitely within those categories. So let's start off with just doing a basic type against gender. So we're just going to do a really simple one, and there's multiple ways that you can do this. So let's just start with a pie chart, and what we want to do is we want to break it up based upon type. Now I'm going to use the option of creating multiple graphs. And what we want to do, I'm going to keep this on the same graph. You can do it on separate graphs if you want. We want to split this up based upon a variable, and in this case the variable is gender. So click OK, OK, and what we see here, and what I'm going to do is I'll also generate the same graph as before, the same bar graph as before, but I'm going to split it up based upon, excuse me, gender. So we'll go to here, which is still just doing a simple We want to have multiple graphs, again by variable, and in this case we want to split it up based upon gender. Okay, right, and so what we've got here is two graphs, again two that we need both if we want to make a comparison. So in this situation, these are the females and these are the males, and this is a way in which we can actually compare them. So here we see that, like just as a very basic first off interpretation, the blue here and here, they seem to make up the dominant, but the male bike makes up the overwhelming dominant, whereas we see here that within the females, so sorry, let me restart. Within the males, the main category without a doubt is bike, and then we see that there seems to be an equal contribution from the walk and the jog situation. Whereas in here, with the female, which is different, the bike and the walk is actually roughly the same. So there's roughly just as many joggers as there are walkers, and that the jogging, whilst it still makes up like a similar percentage than what we see with the males. So sorry, that's one feature that's in common with the two, is that there seems to be an equal percentage of joggers, and for the other as well, the other really makes up virtually nothing in both cases. The major difference is obviously the blue and the green. So this is how you can form a visual analysis. Now again, too, the same would probably the same interpretation we can generate from looking at the type here. So if you're wondering about how we interpret it, we can see here for the females we've got the actual values, just as I mentioned before, like when we're dealing with the bar chart, and this is what we've got for the males as well. So what we can see here, and it makes absolutely no surprise whatsoever, that the bike is the major. So that's what we see here, and that's relatively obvious. And then we've sort of got equal percentages for these, equal amounts for these two, and the other makes up virtually nothing. In comparison, though, to what we see within the female, is that instead of there being a huge amount of people that are riding bikes, we've got roughly a 50% breakdown of bikes with walk, and then jogging again makes up a relatively small amount for both. So this is one way in which we can compare a categorical against categorical. And just to remind, the two categorical variables that we're looking at is, excuse me, is we're looking at a gender versus type. So this is how we split it up into two graphs instead of having them both as one, and then we can look at the patterns between the male and the female, and the same is true of the bar chart that we've done here. Okay, now let's just say that we wanted to do a number analysis on that. So what I've got within here, you'll see, is a tally multiple variables. So it's the same sort of process as what we had before, so stat tables, but here we're going to use a cross-tabulation in chi-squared. You don't have to worry about the chi-squared yet, that's something that we're going to cover in the weeks to come. Okay, now it doesn't matter in terms of what you select for the rows or the columns when we're analysing two categorical variables. So I'm just going to put type and gender, and I'm going to leave these percents out, but we could, well no, we'll keep them in there I suppose. And so we'll just click OK. Alright, and so what we have within here, similar to what we had, but if I scroll up before, so this is when we were just dealing with one variable, so you see the type here and then the counts and the percent. What we've got within here is now just a cross tabulation where we've got the types on the rows and the gender on the columns. So we've split this into two. So this is the female component and this is the male component, and the interpretation is exactly the same as what we had before, so I won't bore you with it because I know I've gone into detail with it. Now I thought before we move on to, actually no, it'd probably be better for me to move on to the other stuff and come back to a few extra tricks that you can do with this. Okay, so now let's look at some single numerical data. So the only numerical quantity that we've got within here is speed. Now there's a multitude of ways in which we can actually take a single variable and gain a visual analysis of it. The three ones that we're going to look at here, which is histogram, dot plot, and box and whisker plot, are probably the most commonly used, especially at an introductory level of stats. So, in order to generate a histogram, it's relatively easy, graph histogram. We're going to be doing a simple, these will all make sense later on. And here we're going to just be looking at speed. So click OK, and it generates a histogram for you. And it's as simple as this. Now, if you're unsure about exactly what a histogram actually represents, essentially what it is, if we have a look at all the speeds that we've got here, I don't know how many is in this analysis. Let's scroll down to the bottom. So they recorded, seems to be quite a few more, sorry about this, 945. Now, you may have the capability of reading through all 945 and gaining an idea about how it's distributed. I can't. So in order for me to be able to gain an understanding of that data is going, okay, let's not consider all of the data on its own, which would give us like perfect precision if we're looking at all of it. Let's actually convert that into separate categories. So what you see here is these individual bars refer to different categories within the data. And so if you have a look, if you highlight over it, it'll actually tell you all the details about it. And you see that the bar value refers to 22, so that's the number of, that's the height of this bar. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. And then you'll see here the bin is 11.25 to 12.75. So what that's saying is they've split up the data, and we've got intervals. In this case, so the interval is of size, so from 12.75 to 4.25, so we've got 1.5 there. So what they've done is they've taken all this data and split it into separate categories of 1.5. So starting with 2.25 to 3.75, so this will be 3.75 to 5.25. Right, so they split up all the data into categories, and then they've gone through all of the data and gone, okay, here's the 0.30. Where does that belong? Well, that's going to belong in this bin here. So in that situation, it lies in the category that's of the data points that are between 29.25 and 3.75. They then do that with all of the data. So again, so if we pick 21 here, we go, okay, so it's probably, I don't know off the top of my head, it's probably this one here. Yeah, so it's in the category of 20.7. So then they split them all up into the different categories, so all the ones that exist, and then they count up how many are in each category. And that's what refers to the bar height. So if I just click this one here, you'll see that this bin, or this category, goes for the values that are between 24.75 and 26.25, and there were 107 of them. And so that's how we can interpret the bars and the overall histogram. Now, the beautiful thing about histograms is it was able to take 973 points of data and generate this graph that, although is not a complete, not an accurate representation of the data, but gives a really good understanding about how the data is distributed. Now, if we wanted to change that, if you wanted to change the bin values, if you wanted to make them smaller, for instance, I think you can just right-click, edit bars. I hope I'm right in saying this. Binning. So in this case, if we click the number of intervals, let's just say I wanted to go from 26, I want to have more. So let's say we want to have 50. Click OK, and you'll see here again too, then the precision becomes a lot better. So obviously, as you increase the number of bins, as it goes to infinity, the closer and closer you're going to get to the actual data set itself. So, you know, if we were to change this again too, edit bars, and we go from binning to say 50 to 100, it's going to become more precise in showing this shape, but you're going to have a lot of these gaps. So these are the intervals where no data points actually lie. So it really is a toss-up between the level of precision that you want to maintain within the data versus sorry, let me repeat that. So basically, the more and more bins that you create, the closer and closer it's going to get to the actual data set, or a display of the actual data as it is. The problem with that is generally the more and more, the closer and closer you get, or the smaller the bins get, the less interpretation that you can get. Or, well, that's not quite an accurate term. That's not quite an accurate summary, I should say, sorry. But obviously, if we make the bins so small that it's virtually identical to the actual data itself, then there's no point creating a histogram. So histograms are great. You're able to summarize huge data sets. Imagine if you had like 1 million points of data. However, you lose precision. And what I mean by losing precision is if we change this back, so we can see here that you see the shape a lot better. So if I change this, say, back to what it had at the beginning, which was 26, if memory serves, click OK. What we end up finding is that shape that we had defined really well before, we don't see as much. So obviously the shape here is a lot more clunkier than what we had before. However, we don't need anywhere near as many bins in order to generate it. So when I say bins, I mean the categories. Now, in terms of these individual bins here, we see that there was 53 points of data, and we know that it was between 23.25 and 24.75. So there were 53 data points. But we have no idea about how it's distributed in that interval. So all the values might actually be between 24 and 24.1. That's not covered in this here. The only way that we would be able to get that precision or understand how it's distributed in that interval would be if we increase the bins. But as I said before, as we keep increasing the number of bins, we're just getting closer to what we had to start off with. So just something to keep in mind, that we should always be aware of the weaknesses and the strengths associated with any form of statistics when we're applying it to any real-world application. If we don't take that into consideration, we could draw conclusions which could have dire consequences, whatever the application may be. Okay, So I know I went into way too much detail with that. Another way of generating a histogram-like feature is a dot plot. So a dot plot here, you'll see that it has a very similar, so we're dealing with speed again here, click OK, you'll see that it has a very similar shape to what we had before. Dot plots and histograms should always be isomorphic in their interpretation. What I mean by that is the interpretation you get from one should be the interpretation that you get from the other. So interpretation of one is virtually the same interpretation as what we had before here. Now the difference within a dot plot as opposed to a histogram is that in the histogram we use the bars to represent height. Here we use, excuse me, we use dots to represent it. So say in this situation here, where the bin, say the bin in this case is between 8.5 and 9.5, there is one dot. And it says down the bottom here, each symbol can represent up to 2 observations. So that means in that interval we've either got 1 or 2. And so on and so on. So instead of representing the height with bars, they just represent it with dots. Same thing. So everything that I said before works out to be exactly the same. Generally though, like what you will see in the literature, what you'll see in this subject and what you'll see in pretty much all statistical analysis is that the histogram is generally favoured over the dot plot. I personally have no preference either way. I use histograms in say my research work that I do for my PhD and for other things because it's so much more commonly used. But really, one's not better than the other. Okay. So the last way that we can generate a visualization for, or the last one that I'm going to cover in this tutorial video, I should say, is a box and whisker plot, or as it's known as a box plot. So we're just going to do a simple one here again with the speed. Click OK, and we see here this is believe it or not, the box plot is a compressed version of compressed version. So the box plot is essentially like a compressed version of a histogram. It's not that exactly for anyone watching it, hearing that and going, no, it's not exactly that, but essentially that's what it is. Instead of having the multiple bins that we had within the dot plot and with the box and whisker plot, essentially a box and whisker plot just generates it into 5 groupings. So we have one interval here, one interval here, so sorry, 4, what am I saying, not 5. So this interval, this interval, this interval, and this interval. And for people that are unaware, these 5 points represent important features of the data. So this point here refers to the minimum, this point here refers to the first quartile, this line here refers to the second quartile, or as it's more commonly known, the median. This is the third quartile, and this is the maximum value. So again, another way of being able to understand the distribution of the data on its own. I personally think they're becoming a little bit redundant. I would prefer to compare histograms against each other, but that's up to the individual researcher, statistician, whatever. So we'll just kill that. Click no, because I realize that this has gone pretty long as it is. And so now we're going to look at some basics or some number analysis when we're dealing with a single continuous variable. Now, you're going to learn a lot more of these as the semester goes on, but to start off with, we're just going to be dealing with basic stats, and this is going to be stats that if you hadn't seen prior to this class, you would have probably heard a lot over the past couple of weeks. So we just go to basic statistic, display descriptive stats, select the variable. We'll be able to use this later on, and then if you click the statistics button, you'll see that there is a set of different stats that you can generate, and you're allowed to select them. So what I'm going to do is just, just select the ones that I'm sure most of you have seen. So mean, standard deviation, variance. I'm sure probably most of you have seen coefficient of variation. First quartile, median, third quartile, may as well include the interquartile range, mode. We'll forget these, as I said, this will make more sense later on. Maximum and minimum, may as well include the range. And you can include or not include whatever you want. Click OK, and we can see that the output is given here. So obviously looking at this tells us a lot of things that the graph wouldn't tell us. So for both the histogram, for the dot plot, and for the box and whisker plot, or box plot, however you want to refer to it, within the box plot, we get certain bits of information. So we sort of can get a pretty good idea of the median, first quartile, third quartile, maximum, minimum, and from all. But we can't get the exact values. So similar to what we were doing with the categorical data, when we can compare the percentages using a pie chart, and we can compare the actual frequencies using a bar chart. And we can get an idea of the actual values, but we can't get the exact values until we do a tally, so as we had here. So whilst we can generally get an interpretation of these values from looking at the different graphs that we've gone through so far for the numerical data or the continuous data, we don't get the exact value. So we don't get the exact mean, standard deviation, variance coefficient. Now I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each of these. A lot of these are very important. The mean, standard deviation, variance, coefficient of variance, not so much. Median, Q1 and Q3 are all very, very important things, and the importance of that will become more evident as the semester progresses. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to look at is dealing with the situation where we want to compare numerical versus numerical. So in this case here, we don't really have, well, we only have one numerical variable, so this is kind of a bad data set to work with, but what I'm going to do is just treat time as, actually no, let's get some actual decent data. So have a look within here. What were they dealing with in this case? So this is for the gone fishing data. Right, so I'm going to download that data set, which is here, and just quickly let that open. Okay, and you'll see here there's 4 variables. Fish type, which is, fish type is when we're dealing with the type of fish, obviously, so this is categorical. Length and width, I don't know what measure, length and weight, sorry. I'm not sure what units they're in. Length I'm assuming is millimeters, weight I'm assuming is grams. But both of these are continuous data types. And the angler here is kind of like the time or the time intervals that we had in the previous one. There's just 2 anglers and it's detailing who's caught what. Okay, so now we want to compare these two against each other. So let's start with the visual analysis, and the scatter plot is by far the best one to always start off with when you're dealing with continuous data. We just go to graph, my apologies. First option, scatter plot. We're just going to do a simple one here, and we'll put length in and weight. Click OK, and we see here that we have a graph here that shows the different lengths and weights. So we see there's a pretty strong linear relationship that exists within the two. We have got this one point of data out here, and this refers to a shark, I believe, that was caught. So that's why we've sort of got this massive point of data across there. Now, so that's essentially how I know this is very simple, but that's how we're going to compare numerical versus numerical at this point in time as a scatter plot. There is so much that can actually be done in terms of further analysis, but that's essentially the scope of what we're covering. So what we're going to cover, what I'm going to cover in the remaining time that we've got, is just a few little extra tricks that you can do with all of these in order to essentially enhance the analysis that we're doing. So in this case here, we're comparing the lengths and the weights against each other, but let's just say I wanted to specifically look at those that are caught by angler 1. So what we can do, if we go to stat, so we're going to graph, scatter plot, still going to be doing a simple, but let's actually change the data. So we go to data options, and we want to specify exactly what we want to include. You could also have exclude, but generally it's easy to include. And we're going to have a condition, so rows that match the condition, and that will be that, I can't remember which one I said, I think it was the angler is equal to 1. Click, so angler is equal to 1, click OK, and hopefully sometimes it's yes, good. Sometimes it can be a real nightmare. In this case here, what we've done is we've segregated the data that we had before, which was for both angler 1 and angler 2, and we've now generated a graph just for angler 1. So that's a nice way of being able to introduce a further way of being able to segregate the data. Now, if you wanted to actually compare angler 1 against angler 2, that's something that can be done quite easily as well. So you just go to graph, scatter plot, and by the way, everything that I'm going through now can be applied to all the other graphs that we've looked at so far. So you follow the exact same instructions, it's just for a different graph. So we go to, what we want to do here is we'll firstly get rid of this. So we're going to click all rows, so we're going to include all of the data, click OK, and then we say we want to generate multiple graphs, which we do in this case. So let's just say we want to split it up, we want to keep it in separate panels of the same graph, overlaid on the same graph. Well, let's just have it as overlaid on the same graph. And we want to have the by variables within separate panels. In this case, we want it to be angler. Click OK, and you can see here it's just generated a side-by-side scatter plots of angler 1 and angler 2. Again, just a nice way of being able to segregate it. If you wanted to add more conditions into that, you can do it as well. So let's just say I wanted to compare angler 1 against angler 2 in the same sort of setup as what we've got now, comparing length to weight, but I only wanted to deal with bream. We can do that very easily. So Click no. So let's go to graph, scatter plot. We're going to a simple, we're doing length against weight. Remembering firstly that we're going to split it up. We're going, in terms of the multiple graphs, we're going to have them overlaid on the same graph and we're splitting it up based on angular. So we're doing that, but we want to include the option that we only want to deal, so sorry, I should go slower. We only want to deal with, so we're going to specify which rows to include, so we're going to select this option, and we only want to have rows that match the condition, so I'm just going to delete the condition that we had before, that the fish type is equal to, and you have to put, whenever you're dealing with strings, they have to be in double inverted commas. Whoops, my apology. Broom. And it has to be exactly what's here. So see, I've got the uppercase B, that wouldn't match up with anything. It is case sensitive. So we want to have fish type is equal to broom. Click OK. Click OK. And OK. And of course something's going on. Where fish type is equal, no rows that match the condition. Fish type is equal to brim. Cancel. Sorry about this. Let me quickly do that again. Scatter plot, simple. Data options, fish type is equal to, now why has it got a problem with that? Oh well, look, I'll leave it. I don't want to extend the video any longer than it needs to be, but you can actually do that. So what if I was to say, okay, I only want to deal with the situations, hopefully this will work. So no, we've already split it up based on angler, and we were going to split it up based on fish type, but let's just say I only want to deal with a situation where the lengths are greater than, say, 200. And we can do that. So let's just implement that. Please let this work. And here, okay, so this is where we've actually been able to add a third condition. So we split it based upon anglers, and then we've included that the condition is that we're only dealing with lengths that were greater than 200, hence why the bottom end of the length axis we've got here starts at 200. So okay, I'm going to leave it there. Now what for these tutorial videos to really work, you need to let me know what sunk in, what didn't sunk in, where you'd like for me to actually go further and go into more detail with the stats, or go into more detail with the actual Minitab process, or procedures I should say. So please either, I prefer you didn't really comment on the YouTube video because I might not check it that often, but definitely, excuse me, definitely send me either an email to my my Hotmail account or post on the QT page, either the official or the unofficial. I'll definitely get a notification either way. So let me know what you liked, what you didn't like, and I'll take that. If you want more added, like an extra video, I'm happy to do it if enough people request it. Okay, well I hope that was okay for you. Bye.